So I'm Katie McCullough, I'm founder of Festival Formula, and my colleague here.
I'm Bignall, I'm a film festival strategist as well, but I also help with all the intake of new clients. So organising film files and making sure that you've got everything on day one to start.
So today we're going to talk about kind of how to approach film festivals with your film in mind, how to figure out which festivals are best for you, how to best spend your money. But also we've got 2 case studies. We always like to kind of be able to show the film and then talk about how we approach the circuit. So you get to see the quality and standard of the film and why we chose particular festivals. So we've got 2 short films today. One is Adnan, which is a live action short, which is beautiful. And then we've also got an Irish animation called Memento Mori as well, which is a horror animation voiced by Mark Gatiss. So in for a treat. So we thought we'd kick off by talking about the different types of festivals and what they mean and why it matters for your particular film. So we talk as a company about 3 tiers of festivals. So we have the very top tier, and I'll go through these in a moment. We then have the audience-led, which is actually the most fruitful part for any filmmaker on the circuit. And then we have the last one, which is a little bit more focused, the niche format and genre specific. So when we talk about top tier festivals, we mean the top shiny ones that are very prestigious. They're very kind of industry heavy. They generally tend to be premiere led. So by that, what I mean is they're after a world premiere or an international premiere or European. So something very, very kind of shiny, something very exclusive. They also are very industry heavy. So if you look into the audience are not going to be your average punters off the street. They're going to be other filmmakers, agents, distribution companies, production houses, and press. They are very exclusive, as I mentioned, so they have smaller programs, especially when it comes to short films. So, for example, Venice and Locarno generally screen about 10 to 12 films a year in their particular editions. The focus is more on the features. So they kind of play second fiddle a little bit. And they can cost a lot of money. Not all of them. Cannes is actually free to submit to. But places like Venice is about £50, I think.
Yeah.
Locarno can be like £70. It's quite a lot of money to spend on a very prestigious festival that might not be right for your film.
In fact, we've been to Venice. That's the red carpet outside, and it's not the most interesting place to go to. It's just full of industry buzzing around and not really interested in you as an independent filmmaker.
So the other ones, just so you're aware, so Bignall in Germany, Locarno in Switzerland, this is Cannes in France, and then also Venice at the end there. So there is a very kind of small part of the circuit, but there's a whole load of other festivals which are more fruitful for you. So we'll talk about the audience-led for a little bit. So these are less premiere focused. So they're not always necessarily asking you how to have a particular premiere to screen at our festival. They're just after interesting, good content. They can be industry known as well. So they might have affiliation with Academy, Academy, or IFTA, or BAFTA, or Canadian Screen Award, or they might actually be recognised by Movie Maker magazine as like, top 50 festival to attend, and so on. They do have larger programs. So either they have bigger programs for short films, so they can screen more films, or they are short specific, which means they're only playing short films. And that can be sometimes a festival screening 300 films. So you've got more opportunity for your film to be selected. They are also not as expensive as those big hitters before. So they can be a little bit more fruitful for your budget. You can stretch it a lot more. You can find a whole lot more festivals to submit to. So if you want to go through the festival.
Yeah, so the first one's Estetica. So Estetica's in York. And there's a lot of students that go to it because not only do they do screenings, but they do lots of good masterclasses. So if you want to learn about cinematography or distribution or hear someone that's been there and done it, there's a really good festival for that. So that's BAFTA and BIFFA qualifying. And then you have London Short Film Festival, which happens in January time. Again, that is BAFTA and BIFFA qualifying as well. Really good film festival. They program some quite interesting styles of film, not the conventional sort of films you'd normally see. This is Clermont-Ferrand. Clermont-Ferrand is right in the centre of France. It's the largest short-specific film festival in the world. That's actually the Cocteau Theatre in the Maison de la Culture there. That's a 1,500-seat cinema. It's huge inside there, literally, they have a whole upstairs section.
And it's comfortable, I will say. Very comfortable.
Yeah, it's quite a weird place, actually. It's a bit like the Barbican kind of thing. It's quite crazy.
Yeah.
And then you have Tribeca in New York. So Tribeca is actually quite a newish festival. I know it's quite well known. It was made off the back of September 11th, so Robert De Niro and a few others came together to make a festival. And Tribeca now is an Academy, BAFTA, BIFA, and everything. Like Thanos' glove, it's got all the jewels in it kind of thing, from an awards point of view. It's a really good festival, and they have screening locations all around Manhattan in New York.
So then we want to talk about the niche format genre festivals. So these generally have a really focused audience, either because of what their remit is or because they're focusing in on a particular genre. They can be really hyper-specific, so they might have something that it might be a narrative issue that they want to explore, it might be an age of a filmmaker or a career development, but it plays to the strength of the film. So what we always say to people is, if you've got something that fits their remit perfectly, you'd be foolish not to attempt that, because you're exactly what they need. And they can also have a lot of community as well. So let's say you're into making horror. If you make a horror film and it plays at one festival, all the other horror festivals will be looking at that program and may actually get in touch because they've heard about your film. So just to go through these, we've got Hlava Documentary Film Festival, which is in Czech Republic. So again, it's very, very heavily attended by people who love documentaries. So if you have a documentary, it's very good. They also have a really good focus on experimental documentary. So again, it can be really, really hyper-specific.
They also paint chalk lines between all the venues in the city. So literally, if you want to get to a certain venue, you just follow the pink line through the city. You just trundle around and you'll find where the venue is, so you can never get lost.
No, it's very cold though, very cold. Then we have Black Star, which is in, I think it's in New York, which is wanting black creatives. So not necessarily stories about black narratives, but they want kind of black filmmakers. This one here, BFI Future Film Fest, is for filmmakers between 16 and 25. So again, really, really hyper-specific. And the last one at the end is Annecy Animation Festival. It's one of the biggest festivals for animation, which is in France. So why are there a different variety of festivals? There are hundreds and thousands of them, and they all have their own particular focuses, but they all have different audiences. So just kind of going back to what we've literally just touched on, the top tier ones, generally for an industry audience, but then you have the ones underneath which are for the average cinema goer or the filmmakers that are kind of at the beginning of their career. They also have different tastes of films. So those top tier ones generally want highbrow, very arty-led, energetic narratives, but then you have other festivals that just want something nice and light and to put in front of an audience that's perhaps family friendly, but they have different reasons for existing. So in America, it's quite common, because it's so vast, that a particular state will go, look, we've got a massive sci-fi community here, but the nearest sci-fi festival is like 2 states over. It's a bit of an effort to travel. Let's make our own one. So that's how sometimes festivals can start. They're literally just, we've got an audience for something, we don't have it, let's put it together. Whereas others might be a little bit more specific, where they're like, we want to focus on our emerging talent that's in our local area, so therefore their festival might only be for people from that area. So you can only submit if you're in that particular region.
I think also another thing to just pick up on as well, which is what a trap that filmmakers fall into, is that you'll make a list of festivals that you want to submit to because they may be quite classy and glossy and have all the lights and everything, but understanding your audience and where your audience is and who wants to watch your film is very, very important, because everyone wants to submit their film to Berlinale in Berlin, and they have a very arty community and the festival programs very weird films. So if you have a very generic film, it's probably not the best place to submit it to. So it's understanding at the festival through research, actually who's going to be watching my film, and is my film right to submit to them as well? And that can save you a lot of money in the long run.
Which is everything that's just said here. So
just helping you.
Yeah. So yeah, understanding your audience, that is the most important thing, and it should be something that you're thinking of before you've even started making the film. Like, why am I telling this particular story? Who is it going to identify with? Is it a universal story, or is it something that's very, very rooted in kind of local history, perhaps, or a local narrative? But festivals will massively appreciate if you've read and understood and researched what they do like and what they don't want. Some festivals will be very, very upfront. Let's say pick on horror, just because there's lots of subgenres. They will sometimes say, we don't want psychological horror, we want blood, guts and gore. So of course, if you've got something that's in the former, you're not going to spend money and waste it there. Other festivals might not have a remit, but they will say what they're after. So Edmonton International Film Festival in Canada, Academy affiliated, they don't have a comedy category, but literally in their rules and regulations, in their write-up, it will say, we love comedy, which basically means they want more of it and they like it to program. So of course, if you've got a comedy, it makes sense for you to try there. But as Ian touched on, it can save you money. Like, we don't want any filmmaker spending silly amounts of money on festivals that just doesn't suit their film. We want them to be able to spend their money and increase the opportunity of the film getting selected. Sometimes it's a little bit more research, but it's better than you just kind of scattergunning it, which is a very quick way of spending money, also a very quick way to get a lot of rejection. So now we're going to talk about how to start looking for the film festivals.
Budget, money, having lots of it. I think the thing about budget is that you need to understand when you're going onto the circuit that you have a set amount of money. So if you say I've only got £300, for example, or £400, that's fine, but at least you know what the line is. And if you go over the line, it's going to start costing you more money and you're potentially going to have a bad experience. The easiest thing you can do is in pre-production is actually write a line in your production budget for submissions, because of course, what's the point of going on the circuit if no one's going to watch your film? And the best thing to do is not go into your own pocket, take it from the production budget, so it's not actually costing you. I've spoken to too many filmmakers that have spent £2,000 and it's just gone instantly. And the most important thing is understanding where the budget's going to be, hopefully in your production budget, or what it's going to be, because it'll keep you structured and it'll make sure that you're not spending too much money, because it's, unfortunately, when you go on Film Freeway, which is a submission platform that's out there, there's thousands of festivals on there, it's very easy to get quite click happy. If you've gone over your budget line, you know that you have to stop and just let your journey play out with what you submitted to. Now, assets is another thing to consider. So the spine of this in purple are kind of the main ones to understand what your film is: live action, documentary, short, feature, animation. That's going to help categorize generically where your film is going to sit. So a short film by Academy ruling will state that your film will be 40 minutes and under, but that rule can vary from festival to festival. Some short specific festivals will say, yeah, we're happy to take it 60 minutes and under. Some of them have an even smaller window. They'll say it's 15 minutes and under. So there's, depending on where you're submitting it to, their ruling will flex, but generally speaking, it's about 40 minutes and under for a short film. Features are generally 60 minutes and over. It's very important to understand there's a grey area. If you are going to make documentaries, there's this horrible grey area. So if you imagine you've got 40 minutes for a short as your cutoff, and then you start at 60 minutes for a feature, you've got this grey zone between 40 minutes and an hour. And if you've got a documentary, we found a lot of documentaries come to us that are like 55 minutes. But where do you submit it? There's no category for it. It's a grey area. There are sometimes what we call mid-length categories, but not every festival has that. So understand where your film is going to fit in terms of runtime. It's really important to understand that. But really outside of that, you've got lots of generic categories that you'll be familiar with. Sci-fi and horror are really vibrant parts of the circuit. You might be a female filmmaker as well. There's female specific film festivals around the world that you can focus on as well. There are student categories to be able to enter into, as well as student-focused festivals, and comedy, fantasy. So you've got quite a lot, but then even outside of that, you can dial down into some really unique categories. I mean, we've sent films to festivals that want films that have narratives with umbrellas in them, and films about food, and films that are shot on a mobile phone, and films that are shot on a mobile phone in portraits. So you can get really specific. If you can literally think of a thing, there's probably going to be a festival. There's a bike festival in Holland.
There's plenty of bike festivals, yeah.
So like, the thing is, if you've got a bike and it's the main part of your film, why not? Why not submit it to a bike festival? Because they want that type of film. So I think the more specific you can make your film to categories that you're submitting to, the better. You're helping identify your film as something that they want. That being said, there's a lot of categories at film festivals out there that will just say, there'll be like a short category, and it's just a short category, and it's 40 minutes and under, and that's it. With genres, though, you might find that you have animation horror, and you might find there's an animation category and there's a horror category. Now, it's down to you which one you want to submit to, but don't submit to both. only submit to one, because most festivals will look at the film and go, okay, that should be in our animation category, we'll move it out the horror one they submitted to, and vice versa. So don't worry, they do a lot of moving things around the scenes. Don't think you submitted to the wrong category because you haven't. So that's generally fine. But it's really important to understand what your film is. I do remember talking to a student once a few years ago, and they were pitching their film to me. I said, so what type of film, what genre is your film? He goes, oh, my film doesn't have a genre. I was like, what are you talking about? Of course it has a genre. At the very least, your film is a drama, because everything is a drama in live action, at the very least, if you have conflict in your narrative. So understanding what your film is very, very important, and can help guide you and make your film fit into very small pockets on the circuit.
But also trying to get into the way of thinking, you know, when you're trying to find something on IMDb or Amazon Prime or Netflix, sometimes you'll see things that aren't necessarily a genre, they're a theme or they're a story type. So, you know, as Ian mentioned, there are very specific festivals. Some of the most specific ones that I can kind of think of is there are rom-com festivals. You know, festivals that want stories about relationships. That is exactly what they're after. So you kind of know what they want from the beginning.
There's actually a festival in Australia, and their remit is they just want nice narratives, just things that end well, have a good feel to it, just a nice story, and that's their main remit. That's all that they want. So there's some really specific festivals out there that have a really unique remit. Right, so on the right-hand side here, this is a PDF, and it actually goes off about 5 pages down to the bottom, but it's just an example. This is metadata. This is basically what makes up your film. Obviously, we didn't look after Alien, but this is just an example. So it basically takes all the information that you have in your film and it puts it in one document. I would always recommend to just make a Word doc and just throw everything that you have down. So a good place to start is go on the submission platform. And when you're on a submission platform, when you're making your film profile on there, there'll be a lot of questions. They'll be asking like runtime and genres and log lines and synopsis and all these kind of things. It's great to put it in one place because you may need to have that to hand at some point. Because if you're submitting on a platform, not all film festivals exist on Film Freeway. They exist in other places as well. So it's important to understand that if you need to do more submissions down the road, having that to hand saves you bothering your team for information that you might need. So it's a really good thing to have. It's basically a cheat sheet. Now, I was touching on categories and things, but other things that will help you with the submissions process is understanding why festivals ask you for certain things at submission stage. So, for example, they may ask you for the production country or nationality of director. Now, production country is really important. So, for example, you could submit to a festival in Ireland, and you could be an Irish production, and there will be possibly an Irish category you can submit to that only Irish filmmakers can submit to. That is perfect for you, and that's what they want, because obviously they want to represent their country as best they possibly can. Now, there'll be an international category, and if you imagine the rest of the world submitting into one category, it's going to be really bloated. So making sure that you're separated away is really important. So that's why they ask for production country. Production dates, another thing as well, which we've noted up here in 1979. Production date's really important because actually what they want is they generally want the newest films at film festivals. So at the moment, they generally want 2021 productions onwards. So it's normally the year behind you in the one that you're in. And that's what they're after because they literally want to have the freshest content out there. There are some festivals that don't mind what your production date is, like Sundance doesn't mind so much.
2 years,
so it's 2 years, a bit more flexible. Yeah. So it does vary from festival to festival, but it's really just because they want the newest stuff. Duration is something that's really important. I've just touched on it a minute ago, but duration, there are going to be lots of categories that you can fit into. There'll be 15 minutes and under, super short, 6 minutes and under. There'll be 30 minutes and under, mid-lengths, and there'll be different duration levels. This really separates you out from the crowd in terms of where you're going to be sitting on the submissions, intake that they have. So again, have a look at that because it might be that if you have a really short film that you can fit into an ultra short category, again, take you away from the main crowds. Date of birth is not particularly because they're being nosy and want to know how old you are, but there are under 18 categories and there are under 26-year-old categories at some festivals. But equally so, there's over 65-year-old categories if you're still doing that at 65 years old down the road. So date of birth is, again, so they could just identify you if that's something that they need. And also budget. is quite important as well, because there are some festivals out there that are zero budget festivals, but also ones that say, okay, if your film production is under £5,000, you can submit to this category. If you're over, you can submit to this category. So it basically means that you're submitting around like-minded films at the same value for money that you've made your film for. So I'm talking about submission platforms. This is quite important to sort of understand the hierarchy of finding festivals. So Film Freeway is the biggest submissions platform that's out there. It's kind of like a film festival version of Amazon. Okay, so you'll literally go on there, you'll upload your film file, you'll put all your metadata that makes your film up inside there. It's just a very simple form. Put some stills and pictures inside there, a trailer if you have it, and you kind of make your profile. And once it's made, you can then submit to literally, I think it's like 10,000 that's on there at the moment, festivals on there. They have loads of ways of searching for types of festivals, from the themes of the festivals all the way through to, I don't know, the nationality of the festival in different areas that they're around the world. It's a very, very useful platform to do your research on, and I would suggest that it's the first place that you should go to. I would say 90% of film festivals live on Film Freeway nowadays. So it's a good place to kind of understand where the lay of the land is and how much stuff costs and what you can submit to. But also, we were talking about Clermont-Ferrand earlier on with the massive cinema. They have their own submission platform called Short Film Depot. It's not very good. It's kind of like using Windows from about 20 years ago, and it's very green as well. So it's not the greatest thing in the world, but it does work. Clermont-Ferrand is a very cheap submission. It's free, but they do have a stamp system on there. It's for like €4 a stamp, I think, or something like that. So it's kind of almost free. If you don't get accepted, you get basically, and you select to be part of this. If you're rejected by Clermont-Ferrand, you're often put into their videotheque, which means other festivals can still see you even though you're not playing at the main festival. So it's kind of like a shot to nothing. But it's a brilliant festival, and I would urge you all to attend it at some point because it's a really great experience. And they have other festivals on there that you won't find on Film Freeway. So, for example, Clermont-Ferrand, you will not find anywhere else apart from Short Film Depot. Same with Interfilm. Interfilm is an Academy qualifying film festival in Berlin. The other one that's not Berlinale, basically. And again, the only place you can submit to them is via Short Film Depot. So it's another place to do some research. You might be able to find some good European-focused festivals there as well. Underneath that, you've got FestHome. Now, FestHome is a Spanish platform. Sitges, which is based in Barcelona, is a massive fantasy festival, but also Spain as a territory love horror as well. It's a really good territory for horror. And you'll be able to find a lot of festivals that you will not find on Film Freeway and Short Film Depot that exist on FestHome uniquely. It should be noted as well, the Spanish versions of BAFTA is called the Goya list, and all the Goya festivals generally live on FestHome as well. So you won't find them again anywhere else. Now, this is the complication. You could think, great, I can do a load of research in here, but these platforms, they're all ready to go. But they do exist on their own websites. Some of the big festivals don't need traffic. So if you're Berlinale, if you're BFI London, if you're South by Southwest, you don't need to be on a big platform. They don't need loads of people submitting to them. If anything, they want less. So they kind of move themselves away from these platforms, and you can submit to them through their own website. That's where the cheat sheet comes in handy. So you've preloaded everything on there to do all your submissions on these platforms here. But when you go onto their website, you're going to have to manually input everything and do a lot of copying and pasting and uploading pictures and films and video links and everything else. So making sure that when you're putting your information in there, it's completely accurate. So it mirrors what's on your platform is very important. But it also means you're going to have to do a bit of Googling to understand that they're not on platforms and where do they live, how do I submit to them, where the submission windows are going to be. So again, not everything lives on Film Freeway. Most things do, but you'll find a few that don't exist on there as well. Now, if you do animation film, you'll find that animation festivals, quite a lot of them will just accept an email as a way of, not all of them, but some of them will just say, email me your Vimeo link and password. We'll watch the film. If we like it, we'll get back in touch. So it shows you can have a proper full-blown system of submitting at the top with Film Freeway, all the way to just sending a very simple email. So it shows you the different ways you can actually enter your film to film festivals for consideration.
And some festivals will utilise more than one platform, and they might do it where they've got one category on Film Freeway, but the majority of their categories might be on Short Film Depot. So it's always good to kind of perhaps find the festival and then see where they accept, and then kind of figure out if it's a particular platform that you need to use. So, do you want to?
Yeah. So this is what I call like your Bible. So this is what you'll make when you're doing a strategy document. So this is how it would look. Now, we use Airtable. Airtable's free. I don't work for Airtable, but it's very good. But if you want to, you can just make this in a spreadsheet like a Google Docs or Excel or something like that. And it's just a way of listing out the festivals that you have. The most important part of it is this second column here. So this is a bunch of dates, and it's actually the submission deadline. So when you're submitting to a festival, they'll have a bunch of submission deadlines like early bird, regular deadline, late deadline. The more you go through that list, the more expensive the submission becomes. So you might find that your early bird submission is $12, and then the regular jumps up to $30, and then your late jumps up to $60. So it's worth hitting that early bird because it's so much cheaper. And being organized is really, really important. So what you can do is you can structure your list and do it by deadline submission date, so you know in order which ones you're submitting to. Generally speaking, try and aim for the bigger ones first because they may be more premiere orientated than others. Not all of them have premiere statuses, especially in short format. It's more features where you'll find premiere status is important. But this is a very important document because you can then break down the territory that the film is playing in, so you know what premieres are left. You can have festival websites, the category you're going to be submitting to, and where you'll find it, Film Free Rave Fest Home, Short Film Depot. So you can literally know where everything is, keep up to date with where it's been submitted to, where it's open. Again, this goes off the screen all the way over here somewhere as well. And you can have how much it costs to submit. You can totalize that so you can see your total running cost. You can also have the start dates, the end dates of the festivals, any notes you want to put down, Academy, BAFTA affiliation, that kind of thing. So it becomes a very important document, and this will be the thing that will keep you most organized when you're submitting on the circuit. So when you're doing all your research on these platforms, essentially that's what you're going to be making, something like this, so you can make a nice comprehensive list of information.
So putting it into practice. So I mentioned that we've got 2 case studies. So the first one we're going to talk about as well as show you is Adnan. So I'll probably show it to you first and before I talk about it. So,
ماما هي حلب بلدنا. هي كانت مدرستي. كنا نردد تحية العلم كل يوم الصبح. هون كان محل بابا، كان يصلح كمبيوترات. هي المشفى، محل ما أنا ولدت. ماما، هون كان بيتنا. حتى نزلوا البراميل بوم وبعدين دمروا حلب.
All them assets in front of the camera and assets behind. So assets on the camera, so it's a refugee story, it's a youth and child narrative, deals with British culture. It is subtitled, which means it can travel a lot further, especially on the European circuit. And it's a heartwarming story. It's not an energetic, high-octane narrative. It's just something nice and sweet and hopeful.
Also,
as well.
to explain as well of youth and children, you can have 2 aspects to that. You can have films that are made for children, just for children to watch, which this can link into, but this is actually a narrative told from a youth's perspective, which is what some festivals want as well if it's more issue-led.
So the assets behind the camera, there weren't too many. It's 2 British co-directors and it's a British production, but it is an asset to explore. So the breakdown of this, they had a very large submission fee budget. You don't have to have £1,000. That's quite a lot of money. But for the £1,000 that they gave us, we found 114 festivals that we wanted to spend that on. So it goes to show you can stretch it quite far. I will say children and youth festivals are free or cheap. So it means that you can really, really stretch it a lot further. So just a little bit of background to this film. They had actually got a longer version of this film. So what we looked after was 15 minutes. They had a 23-minute version of the film. which they'd already tried with the big festivals, and it didn't kind of garner any traction. We'd watched it and we said the 15-minute version is more impactful, it's still kind of beautiful, but it also opens up more festivals because the shorter your film runs, the more festivals you're eligible for. So what we did is we tapped into the audience-led. So still those festivals that can have kudos, industry affiliation behind them, but we also hit hard the youth and children aspect because it made sense. It's a youth perspective, but also it's something that children can identify with as well. Now with this film, we tapped into a few festivals that wanted human rights stories. They wanted stories from the refugee perspective, but the kind of very small part of it is the British focus. There are festivals that wanted stories from British production companies, or they just wanted British narratives. Now this is a refugee story, but in the UK, so of course that kind of tapped into two areas. We always like to do this because rejection is a sorry part of the circuit. But we submitted to 114 festivals. It got 25 selections, which is very, very good. But if you put that down into the percentages, it looks awful. But this is more to reiterate, it's not necessarily about these numbers, it's the quality and the quantity of the festivals that you get into. And those selections, I haven't included them. Those selections were a variety of very prolific festivals on the audience side of things. So this qualified for BAFTA submission, for British Independent Film Award submission. It screened at festivals which were very known across the sea, so Cleveland International. It played at Scottish Mental Health and Arts. So it really tapped into a variety of different places, but of really good quality festivals. And not just, it's a short film festivals, but festivals that had a children's specificity or an Arab aspect to it, or actually just kind of a refugee story too.
Just to explain as well very quickly, because I will go into this later about rejection, but this is actually a very good percentage split. It might not seem like it, but it's very common for most filmmakers to go on the circuit and be rejected from around about 90% of the festivals they submit to. It's a very high rejection level, so quite often you'll submit to 60 festivals, but I'll probably only get into about 6 of them. So it kind of, it feels quite a horrible experience, especially when you go on the circuit for the first time, because everyone's telling you no. But if you have a good story like the one you've just watched there, you can find that you can peak above those levels. And so much so, this film now is being used as an educational film amongst schools and different bodies to teach about the refugee crisis that happened in Syria, and obviously now with Ukraine, that's kind of happening again now. So it's a very important story to tell and for people to understand.
And for this particular directing duo, this was their second short film they've made together. But ultimately, this one is the one that really kind of elevated their career conversations because it played at some very prolific festivals, which has resulted in them both having representation as directors and as writers. And this particular film has got such a vast backstory around it, which is absolutely lovely. We don't have time to go into it today, but just potted history. Adnan is played by a very young boy called Aham, and he is actually a refugee. So he's a non-actor, so they actually kind of used his experience to inform his performance. He now has turned into an actor, and he's doing BBC jobs and everything. But also this particular narrative has been turned into a book as well, a children's book, and it's being illustrated. And all of the funds are going back into Choose Love, the charity, which is basically, if they want to do a private screening of the film, they'll use this because it's beautiful, and all the proceeds go back to the charity. So it is kind of got a second life in a way, and not necessarily a life that the filmmakers planned, but it's a nice kind of turn up of the event.
It was also a production design nightmare.
Yes.
All those little buildings and cutouts they had to do, and all the foil for the ocean.
They had 2 versions of everything.
Yeah, they literally they were getting quite stressed, making sure all the set held together and bonded together, because it literally just held together by tape.
Yeah.
So it looks amazing, and they did a great job, and the lighting worked really well with it, but it was as stressful as it looked.
Yeah, definitely. So in complete contrast, I'm now going to play you a shorter version, a shorter animation.
The expense of equipment is my foremost concern. After all, modern technology like this is what will dispel the superstitions of the Dark Ages and bring us into the light.
So I mean, that's a really nice animation. It's it's a high level of animation. It's actually done by an animation studio that do like My Little Pony and stuff like that. So it's up there in terms of the quality that they do. But also, it's a very good short film.
Yeah, so obviously 9 minutes, so it's shorter than Adnan. So actually, there are some festivals that want films under 10 minutes or 12 minutes. So again, kind of another category to look to. And also an animation. Now, like youth festivals, animation festivals are very free and cheap as well. So again, you can stretch that quite far. So the assets on camera, it is a horror, it's a thriller, it's a narrative piece, but it falls under that genre umbrella. So as I mentioned earlier, some festivals with horror, they might not necessarily want stuff like this, they might want something a little bit more traditional, but that kind of umbrella of sci-fi, fantasy, horror, thriller, suspense kind of comes under one broad umbrella. The assets behind the camera, not too many, it's an Irish production. That was the only thing that really kind of stood out. So they had a little bit more money for submissions, which again, for animation festivals, we can stretch quite far. But actually what we did, because of the quality of this story and the fact that it was something that non-animation specific festivals can play, we aimed for quite a lot of the higher tiered ones, which is why it's not as many as Adnan, even though they had more money. So they'd already tried the top tier with some success. So this actually won the James Horgan Animation Award at the Galway Film Play. So that qualified it for Oscars, literally with its first selection. We tapped into the horror and thriller categories. So again, like Ian's mentioned previously, there will be horror festivals, but you also might find horror categories at other festivals too. That means that you can be a little bit more nimble. Animation, we tapped into the upper echelons of the animation specificity circuit because it's very strong and it's good and impactful. And we tapped into festivals that wanted Irish talent and or production. So there are Irish festivals listed around the world that want basically Irish diaspora. So there are film festivals that want Irish stories and productions in Russia, Spain, Canada, Australia. They're all kind of like littered around. So it's something to kind of utilize. So this is still being submitted to festivals, but they had 104 festivals that we are submitting it to. So far they've had 31 selections, so they've been quite well, again, because it's a really strong animation, but also more traditional festivals. We still have 78% to hear back from. So we can't give you a rejection rate, but we can say there's 22% so far of festivals saying yes. As I mentioned, this film qualified for Oscars, so it was automatically on the long list. Unfortunately, didn't progress, but the competition was quite fierce.
Because it's always Pixar.
Because it's always a Pixar short, to be fair. But yeah, so a real mixture of big, high-profile festivals that you would have known, but then also kind of really tapping into those more specific ones too. This has had quite an interesting journey because it's peaking in both non-traditional and genre, and it's rare because sometimes if you have a genre piece, it really does more better on the genre side of things because it's genre festivals have a determined audience. But this is actually quite interesting because it's doing really, really well in both, which is actually a benefit to the filmmakers. So now we're going to talk about the materials that you need. So when you are actually kind of beginning to submit to festivals, you're going to get asked for similar materials. So this is Ian's area. I'm going to pass over.
Right, so first of all, logline. So a logline is really important to have. It's basically a one-sentence description of what your film's going to be about. Think of it in sort of small chunks, like who's your protagonist, what's the film loosely going to be about, and give a bit of a flavour and an idea of what the film is going to be, but don't tell them everything. Okay, so you want to keep some stuff back. If you have a big secret killer at the end of your horror, you might not want to reveal that in your logline, for example. So keep it nice and concise. So we say no more than 25 words, but also understand there's the way that you can do it. So Alien earlier on, they have a tagline, most famously for theirs. So tagline is, in space, no one can hear you scream for Alien. That's not a logline, A logline would be a crew wakes up on a spaceship destined for a shipping depot, and they get an emergency distress call which changes everything. That would be a logline. So you're giving them a very brief, the audience a very brief sort of like canvas stroke, a paintbrush stroke of what the film's origins are going to be like and what the direction it's going to head in. You also have a brief synopsis.
Oh, hang on.
Oh, sorry, I'm racing on. Go on.
Because we've shown you 2 films today, we thought we'd actually use examples of the synopsis and loglines for them. So Adnan, an imaginative 10-year-old Syrian refugee boy, must use all his creativity to break through his mother's PTSD or risk losing her forever. So we know who Adnan is. We know his kind of journey. He needs to kind of help his mother. But it's just very brief and just kind of sets up the story, but doesn't kind of reveal the ending, what he does. He doesn't mention anything about the cardboard. It doesn't mention anything about if he succeeds or not. It's just something to tantalize.
But also as well, when you write these as well, you might want to sort of you might want to mention a few words inside there like PTSD and mother, and sort of like really sort of paint a very light picture. It's always worth, when you write a logline, you can just draw sort of squares around them so you understand, I've mentioned my protagonist, I've mentioned what it's about, I'm mentioning some hints of what it could be about. So you can kind of really see what you're talking about and whether you're talking about it enough or too much.
Yeah. So also in comparison, Memento Mori, in Victorian Dublin, a post-mortem photographer receives his latest subject, a recently deceased young woman, late one stormy night. So again, sets the time period, also tells you where it is, what his role is, and also what is at stake. There's his latest subject. So again, doesn't expand on it too much, but that's where you can do it in the synopsis.
Yeah, pre-synopsis. So this is where you can expand on your logline. So rather than one sentence, you can do a couple of sentences and add a little bit more context if you need to. The key with logline and synopsis is the shorter the better for all of them. Just because I'm saying 40 words for a brief synopsis and you can have 25 words for a logline doesn't mean you have to go up to 25 words. You can go under and have something very snappy and interesting to read. So we say no more than 40 words, a couple of sentences, add a little bit of context, but still, most importantly, don't reveal too much. Make sure it's a nice, easy flavour of what's going to happen.
So again, going back to Adnan, 10-year-old Adnan has fled Syria with his mother after their family were killed and their neighbourhood destroyed. Now settled in the UK, he must use all his creativity to break through her PTSD or risk losing her forever. So we learn a bit more. We know that it's just him and his mum. So now we know that there was peril that they've kind of escaped. We also now know that they're in the UK, but we now also realise that it's fight or flight. You know, if he doesn't kind of get his mum through the PTSD, he's going to go into the care system. So it's a little bit more kind of peril expanded on there. With Memento Mori, a storm brews over Victorian Dublin as post-mortem photographer Mr. Huxley receives his latest subject, a recently deceased young woman. Her presence conjures the demons of Huxley's character, compelling him to confront the narcissistic life he has chosen to lead. So we get to learn a little bit more about the situation, about him, which is a lot more expansive than the brief logline, but again, it's just something that doesn't tell you absolutely everything, doesn't tell you the story beat by beat. This is going to be used in a festival program, so you want it to entice somebody to come and watch the film. What you don't want to do is tell them everything that happens in it, because they just feel like, well, okay, I don't really need to go see it. It's something to just entice. And
there's some good examples on like IMDb of the public writing their own interpretations of synopsis and loglines, and like for Star Wars, for example, they will basically tell you the first couple of acts of Star Wars before you even watch it, which is kind of, it means you just need to watch the last half an hour. That's kind of what you don't want to do because you're revealing too much. So bios are really important as well. It is able to speak to the audience out there about who you are as a filmmaker. We say no more than 40 words for a bio. Keep it nice and concise. Keep it to your filmic world that you live in. You might be a great horse rider or like to do hiking. This is not the place to have that in your bio. This is really about where do you study and have you released a film? Is this your first film? Or you're a documentarian or you're an animator? That kind of thing. And give a bit of a flavour of where you've come from, where you're going, have you screened anywhere exciting. Also, Lucy's lane here is she's put her website down the bottom as well. So if you have your own website, or you have an IMDb page. If people want to find out more information outside of a very pithy 40-word description, you can find that. And again, it's keeping it short is important because, again, these do get printed sometimes in programs. Stills are really important. This is your silent salesperson, so it's important to do at least for a short, like 6 or 8 screen grabs from your film. Again, don't reveal anything too revealing with the narrative. Make sure that they're nice visual representations of what's going to happen. For example, here you've got a cat called Jam down here. It shows off the artistic animation style of the film. Also, you've got down here Roger the Rat, which is as bizarre as it looks. It is literally a 25-minute film of a man wearing a rubber rat mask with mannequin dolls in the sewer. It is weird. But we put this on here as an example because actually it's a black and white photo, but it's also quite a dark photo. Be aware of how dark your photo can look. So, for example, if you have a nighttime shot, sometimes you'll find some shots will be turned into black and white, shrunk down, printed inside programs, and if it's very small, it might just look like a smudge, like a bit of a blob on there, and you can't get the detail of the picture coming through. So be aware of how dark they can look, but that's kind of right on the line of what I would accept.
Definitely.
Also have in mind as well, when you're doing your stills, have maybe a couple of hero shots. And what I mean by hero shot is if you have a selection, and the promotion that you're going to do for the film with the festival and yourself, have in mind a couple of photos that you want to use to have on Facebook, Instagram, and wherever it's going to be shared.
Oh, just a very quick note, no festival will ever ask you for behind-the-scenes shots.
Yeah.
So they don't want the pictures that you can use for your own website and your own kind of press that you might do. They just purely want narrative shots. They want stories from the film, not behind the scenes.
Yeah, they don't want you pictures of you shouting at the crew or anything. So a poster is something that is useful to have. It's not required, but it's a useful thing to have for a couple of reasons. First of all, you can use it for promotion, as we were just talking about a minute ago. But if you look at all of these, they've got loads of space all around them, all around the edges. And the useful thing about space is that you'll get laurels when you get acceptances, and you can put those laurels on your poster, and it makes your poster almost like a passport. It says a stamps where the film has been and travelled around the world. So it's a really good way of saying to people, look at my film and look at what it's done. Also be aware of the levels of some of the laurels that you get. Generally put the better ones on there. You don't want to put like Cannes Film Festival and then Joe Blogg's Film Festival next to it, which no one's heard of before. So make sure that it actually is, you're putting some decent ones on there that really represent the film. A poster doesn't have to be the most creative thing that you have to make in the world. You can just literally take a still from your film, turn it into A4, have it in portrait, and then just overlay some text. I mean, that's purely what this is in the middle. It's very, very simple. Obviously, if you know people that have amazing Photoshop skills, you might have that already yourselves. Then you can do more elaborate things with your poster. If you can't do a poster, it's not going to affect your screenings because you're not selected on whether you have a good poster, you're selected on whether you have a good film. So don't worry, it's not a deal breaker.
Yeah, and also make sure your poster reflects your story. We see a lot of people that like the kind of hand-drawn aspect of things, which is great, but it's because they like it, not necessarily because it fits the film. And sometimes, if somebody wants to show off the poster, you just need to make sure that it's telling people what the film's about, rather than confusing them.
Headshots, the clue's in the name of this one. They want a picture of your head, unsurprisingly. We do get full body shots sometimes. That's not a headshot. So these are professionally done photos, but you could literally just stand against a blank wall and have someone take a picture of you with a smartphone from the shoulders upwards. That's all it needs to be. Nice professional photo. We've seen them all. We've seen holiday photos, people in bikinis and swim shorts and that kind of stuff. That's not a professional photo. Have something that's nice and clear. Don't obscure your face too much. The point of this is that if you're screening at a festival and they put your picture inside the program, people might want to turn around to you afterwards and tell you how amazing your film is. That might be an opportunity of a new producer down the road or a new cinematographer. It's a new opportunity. So being visible and allowing people to find you is really important. Obscuring it or having some ridiculous holiday photo inside there is not the one.
So we've put together some FYIs, and this is kind of covering some aspects that we always get asked about, or is something that we know kind of niggles at the back of filmmakers' minds. So we thought we'd cover acceptance tips.
Yeah, so first of all, be prepared from day one with everything. So everything that I've spoken to you about so far, from your film files all the way through to your stills, all the materials that you have them ready from day one, because you never know, you might be submitting to a late deadline and they do their acceptances in 2 weeks' time, and all of a sudden you'll be scrambling around trying to get everything for the film festival. So before you start submitting, be as finished and as ready as you possibly can. It really, really helps. It saves from massive stress down the road. Make sure you read the deadlines of your acceptance. So we say delivery and embargo. What we mean by delivery is giving the files to the film festival, delivering it on time. So if they give you a deadline, that you should be aiming for that deadline. If you think you're going to miss it for whatever reason, do speak to the festival. Don't go quiet. They may be able to offer you an extension. Also understand what an embargo is as well. So an embargo is basically for announcing the film publicly on social media. Often some of the bigger festivals will put an embargo down because they want to be able to say, first of all, from their own perspective, hey, these films are playing, and then once the embargo has been lifted and they've announced that everyone that's playing, then you can go on your social media platforms and say, hey, I'm playing at this amazing festival. Not every festival does it, but just be aware if they do ask it. Read exactly what the festival is asking for in terms of copy length and files. This is really important because, again, if you're being printed in a program, they may not have the space to have lengthy, wordy bios and synopses. So look what they're asking for. If you go over that limit, you'll find they will butcher it and make it smaller, and all of a sudden it's not what you've written anymore. So it's really important. But also understand film files as well. There are a plethora of film files to send to film festivals. If they tell you a specific type of file, like an MP4 or a ProRes, and there's a particular codec that's involved, and it has to be on a certain data rate as well, read all those little things to understand exactly what they're after, because you might be sending them a file that's not good enough, but conversely, you might be sending them a file that's too good to play as well. So you might think you're sending them a really great file, but what will happen is if you play too good a file, it's being played through a laptop, into a projector, onto a screen, you might find that a couple of frames start skipping, and then all of a sudden it will go bang, and the whole thing will go off it because the data rate was too high, so the file you gave them was too good. So understand what constraints that you have to work within, because it can affect your screening by being too good and too bad, so you need to fit somewhere in the middle. Apart from that, don't leave things to the last minute. It really helps because some festivals will QC your files, QC all the stuff that you have to make sure it works properly. If there are any problems therein, they'll get in touch with you, and if you give them a lot more time, it means you can kind of stop those problems from happening in the first place and repair the issue you may have. Of course, if you hand everything on the last day, you're kind of shortening that window, and they may not be able to catch any issues that may arise, so it's in your benefit to do that. And keep talking to the festival. When you get selected, they'll be in your inbox all the time, and they'll be interested if any social media sharing opportunities you can do between yourself and the film festival. But they may also want you to attend, and you can be up here where we are, and you can be talking to an audience about how you've made your film and having a lovely Q&A about the origins of your film and what it means to you and everything else. So you can get some really good opportunities from film festivals as well. Myths. These are questions that we get asked a lot by filmmakers, and rather than just being asked them over and over again, we're just going to go over them now. So you have to know someone to get your film screened. So this is the idea of knowing somebody within programming, and if you're on first name terms with them, that they may be able to give you a leg up to get into a film festival. It's not true. We know loads of programmers around the world, and I've had drinks with them, and I get on with them really well, but it doesn't mean they're going to play festival formula films. It just means they know who I am. That's it. We had a film play at Venice Film Festival and have its world premiere there. We know nobody from Venice, and literally it was picked on the strength of the film, and that is how programming works. There's no secret backdoor in. So knowing someone, it's a myth. It doesn't actually exist.
Well, I will slightly caveat that, in that there are festivals that do it, but they're not very good festivals that you want to be dealing with. So, yeah.
Films are not watched by the festivals. Again, this is off the back of Vimeo, so a lot of people put their films on Vimeo, and you can look at the analytics of who's watched your film and what point they're watched up to, and how many views you've had. And a lot of filmmakers look at it and go, hey, no one's watching my film. I'm paying all the submission fees. Why is no one watching my film? It might be because you've actually embedded the link through Film Freeway, and if they're watching it through Film Freeway, they're not actually watching it on Vimeo, it's just ported through, it doesn't count as a watch. Also, a lot of film festivals download the files. If they download the file, again, it doesn't count as a watch. So it might feel like no one's watching your film, but you have paid your submission fee. Your submission fee, in turn, is paying for someone's time to watch your film, and they will watch your film at some point. An electronic press kit can help selections. It doesn't help selections. So a press kit is just a document like a PDF of stills, posters, bios, director's statements, all in one lovely pack that you can give the press. It's generally for bigger festivals if they want to write a review about your film, but it doesn't actually help selections. It's something that if you're in film school, you're told and taught how to make an EPK. It's more useful for feature films. For shorts, what they'll generally do if you get selected, if they have some form of press, in the acceptance email, they'll ask you for stills, and they'll ask you for bios, and they'll ask you for the bits of the EPK they actually need. So it's not something you need to go on the circuit with. You need to write a cover letter for every submission. You don't, purely because most festivals don't have the time to read them. Festivals that used to get 500 submissions now get 5,000 submissions. If they had to read every single cover letter, if everyone sent one, they wouldn't get through all the films. Sometimes they'll read them for films that are in consideration. They've gone through the first couple of stages of programming. Cover letters, unfortunately, are starting to become beg letters in terms of, please play my film, I really think this is a good fit. What a cover letter should be used for should be, hey, I have a film about mental health and your festival is about mental health, it explores this topic. If you want to know anything more about it, please email me, and that's it. That's a cover letter. It's to add context.
It doesn't negate getting your film selected. It doesn't increase the potential of your film being taken on.
Yeah.
Because, as Ian said, the majority of people don't have time to read them. But also, you might have a very lovely cover letter, but you might not have a very strong film. So it's not going to suddenly change everyone's mind. It's kind of
putting the strength on the cover letter, and filmmakers do it with log lines, going, I'm getting no selection, so I better change my log line, as if like changing the sentence of your film is going to change your film. It's still the same film. So I mean, a cover letter is the same thing in terms of like, I better write a really great cover letter because it's going to get me into the festival. Then you're weighing everything on the cover letter. So by theory, you should print it out and put it on every seat before your film plays, because that was the thing that got you in, not the film. So it's just understanding what you're doing, and it doesn't really make too much of a difference. If you contact the festival after you submit, it helps. Funnily enough, it doesn't, because programmers are exceptionally busy all the time. They sometimes have day jobs as well. So knocking on the door saying, hey, have you watched my film? What do you think about it? It's not the sort of thing they want to hear. Let them make their own mind up, and they'll get back to you on whether they want to play the film or not down the road, but it doesn't help with selection.
Yep, so as we mentioned earlier, there are lots and lots of film festivals around the world, but there are some that are not as good or as nice as others. So we thought we'd just touch on them. So you will get festivals that are scams. They don't exist. They are literally an opportunity for someone to make money, and the festival doesn't take place, and that's it. And unfortunately, there is no regulatory body for film festivals, so these will keep happening. What we want to do is prep you for how to spot them and actually kind of look out for those red flags. So the first thing that you can do is to actually check their online footprint. How long have they been running? Do they have pictures of their venues? Do they have a website? Do they actually have social media in some form? I will say not every festival has social media for every single platform. So they might just be using Twitter and Instagram and not Facebook or vice versa. But basically looking at their history and looking to see if you can find films that have screened there, because you can reach out to a filmmaker and talk to them. If something doesn't feel quite right, there is no obligation for you to submit. It's your money. You need to know where you're spending it, and you need to be happy when that festival says yes. So there are scam festivals, but at the same time, you get phishing emails. So it's very common for a film festival to send out an email, and they'll know your name or the name of your film, and they will be saying, hey, we'd love to see your film. Here's a 20% discount code, or 40% or so on. Now, because we look after an awful lot of films, we can spot them a mile off because there are some repeat offenders. But basically, someone will send an email and they'll send it to about 40 of our clients, and it all says the same thing. we saw your film here, we'd love to, consider your film, here's a discount code. Now the problem is, it's not personalised. It's a blanket email. And of course people will think, oh, they've reached out for my film, I'm going to submit, I've got a real good chance of being selected.
Also the discount codes very often will be like, here's 50% off, and then you'll look on Film Freeway and it'll be like on a late deadline, which is still like $80. And you're still spending $40, which is still a lot of money. So just be careful with it.
I mean, our rule of thumb, and there is a slight kind of texture to this as well, our rule of thumb is if somebody is reaching out for your film, so they're really interested in seeing your film, they should be giving you a 100% discount, called a waiver code. They should not be asking you, after reaching out for your film specifically, by the way, can you still pay X amount of money? Now, some festivals can't give you 100% off, but it will be a very high amount. It will be something, not necessarily kind of like still getting you to pay above the odds. So not all festivals are bad. They don't necessarily kind of fall into the same bracket because some festivals are in their first or second year. But basically, from what we do is we ask questions. If we already know that it's a phishing email, we'll just ignore it. But if it's a festival that's reached out very specifically, we'll engage with them and say, oh, can we ask why you think the film would be good for your festival? Oh, you said you saw it at a festival, which one was it? Can you tell us? If they don't bother to get back, they're not really keen on the film. And that's the easiest way for you to kind of ask without spending any money.
I had one the other week and it came through and it was like, oh, loved your film, I saw it play recently at a local festival nearby, we'd love it to play at our festival, here's a 50% off code. And I replied back to them, I said, well, you can't have seen it because it's not played anywhere. It was literally, hadn't had its world premiere yet. So it's literally as crazy as that. So there are a lot of festivals out there that want your money, and the idea of a scam festival is that you will submit to a festival, they'll take your submission fee, and you'll never hear from them ever again. You won't know what they selected, you won't hear rejection, you'll hear nothing. So I don't mean to scare you with that, they do exist out there, but of course you're going to be excellent detectives and work out what the good festivals are and what the bad ones are.
So we can give you a few tips. So the first one is if there is any, we're not massively keen on monthly events, monthly festivals, because they don't really benefit the film. Essentially what they're saying is your film was the best of what we got submitted in the last 30 odd days. The benefit of a yearly edition festival is you have been curated and selected out of a very big number of films, so you've proved that the film is strong enough. So that's the first one. Second one is there will be a lot of festivals which have a very big city name in it. So Cannes is a killer because obviously everyone looks at it and goes, oh, it must be to do with the Cannes Film Festival. Not to do with it at all. They're literally in a place that's probably just outside Cannes, but it's not going to benefit you because it's not the Cannes. So you get a lot of festivals that try and hijack that. But then also festivals that have way too many categories. Like some festival, I counted one the other day that had 50 categories. And it will be stuff like Best Female Actress in a Web Series, Best Male Actress in a Web Series, and then they'll do the same thing for shorts and features and sci-fi and horror. A short film festival may have multiple categories, but when they get ridiculous, that's a big red flag.
All loads of awards.
All loads of awards, or anything with the word awards in, to be honest. There's a slight kind of, not all festivals that have awards in the name are bad, but generally they're called awards and they're monthly. Or they do a monthly event and then they do a year-end event, which it's just not really kind of good quality for your films. You want your films to be curated and put alongside other films that are strong as well. But they're not all bad. But the one thing I will say is when you are spending money, you need to know where you're spending it, and that you need to spend it at festivals that you are happy if that festival turns around and says yes.
I think that's actually. The point here is probably the most important one. If something doesn't feel right, there's no gun against your head, just walk away. If something doesn't feel right, the tone they're writing in their text about their festival, or the selections don't feel the right caliber that you want to aim for, or the venues don't look quite right, or something like that. Because often I'll look on some festivals and I'll be like, these are loads of pictures from someone else's festival, and it's not actually their own festival. And that's a big alarm bell, because you want to see it coming from their festival, and you want to see happy, smiley filmmakers with their sign next to them on their stage. So they're the kind of things you want to look out for. But again, just walk away. If you don't feel happy, there's thousands more to pick from. So don't just hang your hat on one festival.
Or ask other filmmakers. Like, filmmakers, tell you now, are some of the most honest people you will ever meet. So ask other filmmakers, or ask us, email us going, I want to submit to this festival, I just want to check, is it good? And we'll be able to go, oh, we don't know this one, let's vet it for you and kind of help you. Our ethos is we want you to spend your money wisely. So I'd rather you ask for help rather than spend it, waste it, or perhaps get into a festival that's not really going to do you any favours.
Yeah, I mean, I shouldn't have to say this, but I'm sure all you are lovely people. But do be polite to film festivals. I'm friends with a lot of programmers, and they get really angry because they get sent some horrible emails saying, you should have picked my film, and what are you doing? You don't know what you're doing, blah, blah, blah. These are people that have families and lives outside of programming. It's not what you want to be doing. But you would be naive to think that programmers don't talk to each other. So if you're shouting at one festival, they all know a lot of other programmers, and they'll be like, have you heard of this filmmaker? Absolute nightmare, don't deal with him. And that will be something that you don't want to have wear as a badge of honor, because it really isn't something you should be proud of. Now, of course, this is a two-way street. Festivals should be polite back to you as well, and sometimes we have to pick up the socks of some film festivals as well. But it's just a really good ethos to have on the circuit. You know, festivals exist to be a platform for you, and it may not feel like it, but you're helping every time you submit to a film festival, even when you're rejected, because your money is helping make that festival exist. So whilst you're not playing there, you're still massively important and supporting the community. So be as polite as you can. Finally, rejection. This is the most important.
We leave the best till last.
We leave the best bit till last, yeah. So it's a really, really important thing to understand, because you're going to see a lot of it. So as I said earlier on, 90% rejection rate is the average on the circuit for most filmmakers. This exists for a reason. It's because there are so many films on the circuit at the moment. It's probably more flooded than it's ever been. For example, the last physical edition of Sundance pre-pandemic had 15,100 submissions for Sundance, and 10,300 of those were for shorts, and then they programmed 87 shorts. That's under 1%. So you've got to understand this is a numbers game. And on Film Freeway, there is a transparency section where they put down the rough numbers of submissions in every year, and the amount of films that they select, and the audience numbers and stuff. So it gives you an idea of what you're aiming at, because effectively when you're submitting on the circuit, you are spread betting. You're throwing it all on the wall and you're seeing what sticks. And you do need a lot of luck. And the most important thing to remember, especially as young filmmakers, is you haven't made a bad film. And I have seen too many filmmakers kick themselves around thinking that they've made a bad film because they're hearing no all the time. It must be something that you've done that is wrong. Unfortunately, with programming is a very difficult fine art, and I wouldn't want to be a programmer because you have to make some really tough decisions. Because the majority of the time, you love a lot of the films that come in, but if you have a cinema space and you've got it for a set amount of time, you can't fit all of that into that space and that time that you have. It's really important to understand that it depends on what you're submitted round. You might have a great film that speaks about a subject, but it might be really unique, and they can't program anything else around it. As a short film, it's not just about your one film, it's about the other things that are programmed around it to make a block. It might be that it's just difficult to program in there. Also as well, and this is the hardest thing to get your head around, but sometimes festivals are rejecting films that are stronger than some of the films they actually have in their program. That's a weird thing to say, but sometimes you'll find that, take horror for example, they're making a body horror category, and you've made a final girl horror, and your final girl horror might be absolutely amazing, but they just weren't programming that type of horror that year. Better than all the other films in that other block, but they just didn't have enough final girl stuff. So ultimately, it is very difficult to get your head around. You're going to hear no a lot. Appreciate it when they do say yes. You will get selections along the way. There's thousands of festivals out there. Make sure you get involved. Make sure you're talking to the festival. Make sure you maximize it as much as possible. Don't let it pass you by, because you don't know when your next acceptance is going to be. But don't ever think that you're a bad filmmaker because of it. It is super competitive out there. And ultimately, you're better than me. I can't make a film. So you're doing something better already. I can talk about film, but I can't make a film. So understand that you are special and you will have your place on the circuit, and don't get too demoralized. Don't reach out to the festival going, I want to know why, because they won't tell you. It's not their remit to tell you why they're not selecting your film. It just didn't make it that year. I think the most special example that I ever came across was that there was a filmmaker at Newport Beach in California, and he had a few screenings around that point, and I said to him, how was your journey? He goes, the first 6 months I got in nowhere. I was rejected everywhere. I was like, oh, crazy. And he goes, but then I got into Sundance randomly. I wasn't expecting it, but it just happened. Sometimes you will get into a big festival. We're surprised all the time with some of the selections that we get. And off the back of that, it snowballed, and he was able to get some amazing traction. The film that we got a world premiere for in Venice, the one where we don't know anybody at the festival, but they still picked it, its journey that he had was a world premiere at Venice, because you have to have a world premiere there to play. It then played at Estetica in York, and it played at St. Louis, which is Academy qualifying in America, and that was it. It was good enough to play at Venice, but it struggled to get traction on the rest of the circuit. So it's just to understand that it is complicated out there, very, very complicated, but don't blame yourself, and everything is a learning experience as you go along.
And there are no shortcuts, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And it's a really long process. I think people don't realise this. When you submit to a festival, and I always use this as an example because it's fresh in my brain, London Short Film Festival happens every January in London. And they open for submissions pretty much a month and a half after they're finished. They're open now and their first deadline is this month, but they don't happen till next January. So you've got a really long stretch to wait. But then you've got other festivals that, you know, they're open for deadlines now and they take place in September. So going back to what Ian was saying about putting together, you know, a timetable of the festivals you're going to submit to, it so helps putting it in order because you understand, okay, I'm going to hear from that festival first because it happens first in the calendar year. And sometimes people don't get their head around that because they kind of go, well, I've submitted now and it happens there, so I should know straight away, right? No. And it can vary from every festival. And sometimes for the first, 4 months of most of our strategies that we look after for clients, you don't hear anything because we either hit really early deadlines or the middle deadline. So we're still waiting to hear back. And it's tedious and it's kind of soul destroying, I will say. But you just have to that's part of it. That's part of the process.
Also, don't set your heart on festivals. That's something that a lot of filmmakers do. So what they'll do is they'll go, I've always wanted to play Estetica. I've always wanted to play Encounters. I've always wanted to play South by Southwest. And they'll put their heart into that submission and then they get the rejection. You set yourself up for a fall because you put so much into it. And sometimes you might be because it's a local festival and you're like, brilliant, it's a festival near me, I want to play there, definitely want to be there. Of course you do, but don't set your heart on it because it's so much more painful when you get that rejection back. So just let it be. That's all you can really do.
And do you have any questions?
Sorry, I realise there's a lot to go through in such a short space of time, but yeah, while we're here. That's a great question.
It is a really good question. So the reason why most people go to the festival circuit is to prove that they can do it. They can prove that their story can travel, and that's the most important thing. When you make your short film, it's about putting it in front of an audience you do not know, so it's not friends, not family, and that's the test of a good, strong story, that you can put it in front of someone that you don't know and they engage with it. So the reason why most people do the circuit is that then they can utilise all of that and kind of go back to someone, whether it be a financier for a feature film or perhaps an exec producer that you're trying to kind of get on board for something, or even getting representation. Let's say you're wanting to get work as a director. It means that when you knock on those doors, they are more willing to listen if you can prove that you've actually done something and it's played at a very well-known festival, because it's shorthand for them. In the end, that's why we're so focused on making those festivals that you get selected for count, because nobody's going to go, oh, I know, Arse End of Nowhere monthly film festival. Yeah, of course I know that one. What they're going to do is go, I don't know that one. But if they see a festival screening that speaks on your behalf, so for example, Aesthetica or BFI London, it's going to go, that's a stamp of approval from an industry-aware festival. So it means that that person that you're trying to talk to is going to have more of a serious conversation. So really, it's about kind of getting a film to travel as far as you can, but at decent, legitimate festivals, because they all feed back into each other. We always talk about how short films are like a calling card.
Well, like a business card.
Like a business card.
Like a business card. It's essentially throwing it out there saying, look what I can make, and look what I'm capable of doing, but also look what I've screened. And, you know, if you play some really good genre festivals, say you have a horror, for example, and you play at Sitges, and you play at Motel X in Portugal, and you play at, you know, South by Southwest as well along the way, and you play in the horror category that they have there, it might be that all of a sudden you grab the attention of somebody at Shudder, and they're interested in taking you onto their platform at the end of your circuit journey, but they won't notice you unless you're playing at visible festivals high up. So effectively, going on the circuit is finding your audience, and by finding your audience, that basically to a distributor makes you, because let's be blunt, distributors and sales agents, they want to make money. So you need to be seen to be valuable to them to some point, that you're good enough to play to an acceptable level rather than a lower level, because it needs to travel. We recommend as a submissions budget £700 or £900. We actually cap it at two prices. Before that, we used to have a conversation where we could say, how much do you have? But we're finding that some filmmakers were just spending too much money for the sake of it, and spending like £1,200 just because they had it. The value in us is that we are able to save you money by not spending too much. It wouldn't be good value for money if you had a £200 budget, because we wouldn't be able to do a lot with that, unfortunately. We have a service fee cost. So we have a fee for making just a strategy, which would give back to you, and you would implement, and you would do all the submissions and do all the acceptances. We have a submissions package, which is a lot more expensive, and we do all the submissions for you. We handle all the acceptances. We look after your film files digitally for you as well in the cloud. So we kind of handle everything for you. That's that service fee cost for either of those packages. That is the point that we make money, because effectively we're charging for the service, whether it means to make something a strategy over a shorter period of time, or looking after your film over a longer period of time, effectively babysitting your film for 18 months. So that's where we make our money. Along the way, if you win prize money, that's not our money because you made the film. So if you win £1,000 somewhere, that's your £1,000. It's not our £1,000. So we only make money at one point. The thing for us is that we're here as a support mechanism. At the very minimum, this is applicable to any of you in this room, and we say this to any filmmaker. We watch any film for free, and we give feedback for free. And the feedback within that will just say to you the level, and we'll treat you as if you're going to be a client and say to you, look, your film is not up here, it's maybe here. These are the types of festivals you can aim for. There are genres and areas and focuses that you can look at on that part of the circuit. This is where we think you should be aiming, but don't aim higher than this, and this is what we think you can do. And effectively, we can give that feedback back to you. The one thing you'll learn on the circuit is you don't get much feedback from anyone. Because there's two types of feedback. There's feedback that we give to you, which will talk to you narratively about your film, things that work really well. There may be some hurdles the film might have that may make it complicated with some festivals to program. The other type of feedback, which is what everyone wants, is why did you not pick my film? And that's a completely different thing. And actually, on the circuit, that's quite complicated because screener notes aren't very good. So if you can request them, they're not actually that great. It'll just be like, good sound, feel like I've seen this story before, acting was okay, not really that useful information for you to process, it's not great. So we're able to give you feedback early doors, and what that means is, this is what we do with every filmmaker, is we're kind of balancing expectations and managing them to make sure that you're not going, I've got a Cannes film in Berlinale and I'm going to skip off to all the big festivals, where actually your film's not that type of film. And maybe you can aim lower and thus save money, because those higher tier festivals can often be quite a lot. So that's a service we offer to anyone, and you use that to abuse that as much as you like.
Yeah, I mean, going back to submission fee budgets, it's going to vary, because £200 is low, but if that's what you have, this is why we mentioned about knowing what you have. It means that you're you'll make better informed decisions on how to spend that on submission fees. Because with £200, what you're not going to do is submit to like 5 really big festivals that maybe the film's not suited to. What you're going to do is try and look for festivals where it's better suited, and you might be able to turn that from 5 festivals to 15. And it's about being savvy, and if you've got assets in the film, like if it's a genre film or, you know, first-time filmmaker or student production or anything like that, they're all areas that you can save money. And there will be festivals that list discounts in their kind of write-up for you to utilise. So it's about kind of taking time, but the most like live action short, £700 is very healthy. And that can, we get a lot of fee waivers and discounts that we can utilise to really stretch it. So that at the moment is getting about 50 festivals across a year. And that's a year's worth of deadlines. And you'll find that the beginning part of the strategy is always heavy because more festivals are open. And as you kind of filter towards the end of the year, those months suddenly go from having like 10 festivals open to like 1 or 2 because they're later down the line. But yeah, I mean, student productions, 500 quid's good because student festivals and categories cheaper. Animation, you really don't need that much. I mean, 500 would probably still get you 100 festivals because they're that cheap. So it really does vary on the film, but for live action, 700 I would say is like really healthy. But I think the more is about making those festivals count, not just doing them because they're cheap, not just doing them because they're BAFTA or Academy. And a lot of it is research.
But there are some great festivals out there that are free.
Yeah.
Cannes is free. But I mean, but Alekino, for example, if you have a children's narrative like Adnan, that's perfect for Alekino in Poland. It's free to submit there. They're a youth-focused festival. During the day, they play to hundreds of screaming kids, like under the age of 10, and you've never been to a screening unless you've experienced that. we've been there. And in the evening, they have very issue-led things like Adnan, and they might explore things like divorce, death, sexting, you know, all the weird topics, but told from a youth perspective, so it has a kind of like an innocence to it as well. And again, that's free. It's 50 years old, the festival. But there's lots of options out there. You know, if you go the BAFTA and Academy Awards route, it's a surefire way of spending a lot of money really quick.
It depends, like, this is where there's a little bit more nuanced. So the festivals that have a focus on human rights might actually be very, very specific. So for human rights festivals for this, they were calling out for perspectives from refugees from kind of misplaced countries. Whereas something like that might be a little bit more, you're not necessarily looking at the immigration aspect, but you're looking at the nationality. So you might be looking at festivals that are wanting stories from that particular country, rather than having it as an overriding issue. Human rights focused festivals over the last 10 years have changed a lot, where they used to be just really purely documentary. And over the last 10 years, they begin to shift, which is actually for the benefit, where they can play narrative fiction. And narrative fiction means that you open up a wider audience. You're not just playing to people that want documentaries, you're playing to a general public.
But do you have the tendency as well, you have to check year on year that some of the human rights focused festivals, some remain static and just continually program the same style year on year, but you'll find some shift like theme and focus. So you have to make sure that you're fitting into, because it might be that one year they're just like focusing generally on just refugees, and then the next year it could be totally something different. So.
Yeah, I mean, if you've got a documentary, the hierarchy in the documentary part of the circuit has its own thing as well. So you've got festivals that want investigative, hard-hitting, issue-driven narratives, but then you also get documentary festivals that want stuff on, you know, sports or music or human rights, or they want creative documentaries where it's not about, you know, the hardcore stuff. It's more about, I've got a really interesting biopic of somebody, you know, who's done something amazing in their career and I want to share it. So it really will probably, like, the leading asset will probably be the documentary part, and then kind of filtering through and kind of going, well, what documentaries want what? So for example, you know, something like CPH Docs, which has just happened, they literally just announced the award winners yesterday or this morning. They generally have an experimental or an art house documentary side to it, but also the harder hitting issue stories. If you take something like Make Docs in Macedonia, they have categories for first-time filmmakers, but also creative documentaries. So they probably wouldn't want all of the hard-hitting stuff that you would see at the other festivals. They're wanting something a little bit more flavoursome, something a little bit more accessible. So that's probably your route, is kind of looking at documentary festivals and categories. I will say, if you've got a documentary, is it a short?
Yeah, 30 minutes.
Okay, so perfect. We get asked so many times by festivals that they're running short of short documentaries and short animations. So that's always good to know. When you have a short documentary that perhaps isn't necessarily of the flavour of the bigger ones, the kind of like hard-hitting issue ones, you can have much more of a fruitful journey at documentary categories, because what you'll find is a festival that has a documentary category has a very wide audience. They're not going to be people that are turning up going, I want to watch documentaries. It's generally the average punter going, I want to watch as many films as I can. Oh, I quite like the documentaries, so I'm going to watch, 10 of them in a block. What you don't have is you don't have that obstacle of a festival going, oh no, we only want the hard-hitting stuff. So you're actually opening yourself up to a more pliable audience, which is always beneficial. Yeah. Good questions. Thank you very much. Does anyone else have any questions? Yeah. Oh, we get that a lot. So
we touched on that earlier in terms of those. Obviously, if you get stuff around the 50, 55-minute mark, it starts to sort of look and feel a bit more TV by run time. But then I think from our perspective, when we watch it, we'll sometimes just say it feels like a TV doc.
Yeah,
so sometimes
not necessarily aesthetically, but sometimes how you're given the information.
It's the presentation of the documentary in the end. So basically, you'll watch it, and sometimes it'd be like pop information on screen rather than allowing the information to settle and be more impactful and have it structured, whereas that's the kind of thing you'd expect from a documentary-focused festival to be playing. So I think sometimes we'll say that it feels like a TV doc, it feels a bit light in places, but it's because it's almost shielding and protecting the way it's digesting the information.
Yeah, I mean, observational docs are better suited to a festival circuit. Talking heads, kind of the dry, not dry, but they can be exceptionally dry, but the very kind of static, informational, almost feels educational, but with a capital E. They tend to be TV stuff because you can see that it's just got a different perspective when you're watching it. I mean, documentary festivals have their own nuances. I mean, some festivals, True False in America, their focus is on hybrid, that kind of mixture between narrative and docu. Not even docudrama, but that kind of real hazy line. But then if you take something like Doc and Roll in London, their focus is music documentaries. So it doesn't necessarily become about the format, but it becomes about what is it covering. We've got 3 music documentary features at the moment. It's really interesting because one is an Australian debut film, which is about an Indigenous rock band going on tour, and it's amazing. Which means, because it's an Australian production, we can go to Australian festivals that no one else can, because it has to be an Australian film. But then at the same time, it's got the Indigenous slant, and there are loads of Indigenous festivals in Canada and in America, as well as in home turf in Australia. But then I also have a music documentary feature, which again, debut, but it's about the Cajun music scene in deep South America and the French history around it, which means that we get to go to festivals that are French-speaking, because it is about French history, music-focused, debut, but it's not necessarily, it's actually a stronger produced film than the other one, but the other one is like a road trip, essentially, whereas the Roots of Fire, which is the Cajun music one, is more talking to, you know, Grammy Award winners, whilst talking about the heritage and the cultural differences of that music scene. So two very different music docs, but they can still go to some of the same festivals, but also completely different ones. So sometimes the format isn't necessarily the lead in it. It can be, what is it about? It's fun because it just means you just get to research in more places. And
just as I say, just be careful again, like if it doesn't fall into that grey zone between short and feature, because sometimes there's just not categories there. But I think actually docs are one of the most complicated things you can have in terms of the edit afterwards and post, because we find it so often that we get filmmakers come up to us and go, yeah, I wanted to make a short doc, but it turned into a feature, because you end up with so much that you can use to make a doc that actually it's very hard to go through it and find what the narrative it's supposed to be and the message you're trying to convey. And we're finding that we're getting a lot of bloated shorts that are quite small, and then we're getting some kind of like ones which are kind of not quite feature, but they're starting to become more TV length because there wasn't enough to stretch the feature as well. So it's quite complicated in the edit. It's actually probably more complicated with a doc than it is with a live action short, to be honest with you, because it's hard to leave out some talking headshots or just some footage that you might have captured that creates naturalism on screen and really conveys a message. So we find that this is why there's not many short docs on the market on the festival circuit, because most people that go out to make a short doc go into the edit suite, sit there, and all of a sudden it's a 50, 60-minute documentary. That is quite tough.
Thank you for coming. Thank you. It's why we do this, because it's so overwhelming. And, you know, even if you didn't come today and you sat down on Film Freeway, there are just too many festivals. It's crazy, and they're not all great, and they're not all good, and they're not all suited.
We have a phrase in the company. So you'll go to film school, or you'll do it off your own back. You'll learn how to make a film, and you'll go and make a film. You think, great, amazing, I've made a film, I've done it, but you haven't. And our saying is, a film is not finished until it's seen. So you always think of your audience. Always think of your audience.
Thank you.